Good evening here from Denmark, and welcome to this TouchGFX webinar. We are getting ready at our end to take you through this webinar today. We will be live in 5 minutes for the actual webinar. Just to give you a quick introduction to the GoToMeeting setup we're using. You are in listen-only mode, but you can ask questions and participate in our polls and so on. And we hope you will ask a lot of questions and, of course, participate in the polls we're doing. You can see also here we will share a handout later on, which will also appear underneath the question pane. And after the webinar, we will also try to ask or answer all the remaining questions, either by voice or by text. Yes. With me today, you can see also Henrik. Hi, Henrik.
Hi, everyone.
And later on, Henrik will share with you what percentage customers think that companies deliver superior user experience. And before we start the webinar, we would like to just test a poll and see what you think of this. And I'll launch it right now. So I hope you can see it. At what percentage does customers agree that companies deliver superior user experience? And please type in what you think. And we will discover the result later on. And I can see the votes are coming already. Yeah, and please do this. While we wait for the result, let's see if Henrik also is ready for take you further into this webinar. I hope you are, Henrik. Good.
I am. Definitely.
Great. Yes, and 2 seconds. In 2 seconds, we will close the poll and see what the results are, and then we will start the actual webinar. Yes, let's close it now, and I will share the result with you. No one thinks 8%. 40% thinks it's 32%. So let's see what the actual result will be later on. Yes, I'll hide it. Great. I think we will start the webinar now. Welcome to this TouchGFX webinar about embedded GUI design. My name is Søren Mikkelsen, and with me today, behind the scene, we have Kim Jönsson, a digital designer from Mjølner Informatics. I hope you're with us, Kim, and if you are, you can please share your webcam. He's right there. Hi, Kim. So you can actually ask a lot of questions, and he will actually be there ready to answer you. Great. And last but not least, we have Henrik, which I gave a short introduction to before. He's a UX designer from Mjølner Informatics with experience in several embedded projects, ranging from white goods, smart watches to different industrial products in both the US, Europe, and Asia, and so on. He will be taking you through this webinar today, and I hope you will enjoy it. Before we start this webinar, it would be nice to us to see what level of experience you have regarding user experience on embedded devices. So we will launch a poll. Now we know it's working. So let's see what the results will be. And I think Henrik will catch you on the right level here. So I'll just launch it right now. I hope you can see it now. And please put in your vote here, or not your vote, what level you are, and so we have a feeling of where you are. And we are quickly reaching 70–80%. While we're waiting for the result, there's already a question coming in, and he is asking, what is the difference between a UX and designer and a UI designer? Maybe you can answer this, Henrik.
Yes, of course. And I see the poll already. I see a few people saying they are competent and even proficient in UX and UI design. So I'll be very excited to hear your input as we go through. The difference between the UX designer and the UI designer is of course something that can be very very different according to what company you come from. In our organization, the user experience designer is usually the first one who gets involved with a customer or with users, and actually try to narrow down what kind of user experience we're looking for with this product, and how we make sure that this product will be a success. And of course, as we do all sorts of different exercises and use different methods to actually narrow this down and align with the customer and align with users, gather the feedback. This is actually when we bring in our UI designers who works usually more detail oriented. So after I have done wireframes where I've sketched up the very early skeleton of the application and got the initial ideas on board and aligned with the customer, this is where the user interface designer really starts to shine, as he'll come in with his thoughts on iconography, typography, colors, and really try to get out the feel and the finish of the product. So in this way, we're actually trying to narrow down what kind of product we're building slowly getting more detail as we get to the final.
Great, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Søren. All right, I'll just go right into it. So today I prepared what I've called 5 fundamentals for embedded GUI design. So these different areas is some of the not necessarily covers everything there is to say about GUI design, but it's trying to cover different areas that we usually want to discuss with customers, or where we usually see the pitfalls when people embark on an embedded GUI design adventure. The first one I'll be talking about today is the context, and this is of course who are your users, where will they be using your product, and really trying to define what context this product will be used in. Point number 2 today will be performance and hardware, and this is of course something that is pretty unique for embedded GUI design. Normally, if you're designing a web or mobile, you won't really think about how much RAM or how big your processor is, because things usually work and perform at a high level. Of course, when we're working with low-cost hardware, we need to be aware of a few things before we get started and really get into things. It's not because the low-cost hardware is limiting you, but it's because you really want to make sure you get the best out of what we have to work with. All right, point number 3 today is rules and recognizability. Of course, when we're working with embedded GUI design, we have a set of rules and we have some recognizability that we want to work with, because usually people come from another world than embedded GUI design. Most people frame of reference come from mobile phones, and this is the touch screen that we use to working with every day and using every day to check social media, check our emails, browsing videos, or even texting each other. So there's a lot of knowledge and a lot of rules that we subconsciously follow and subconsciously expect of GUI design in embedded products. So this is something we have to keep in mind when we design as well. Then, of course, we have consistency. You need to be consistent with whatever rules you follow in your application, and this is something I'll talk a bit more later on. And last but not least, we have the responsiveness and the animation. Again, something that we're really used to from mobile phones. Of course, the difference is mobile phones, they can get updates each week, each month. So you usually see a lot of different animations in the apps that you use every day. In embedded products with lifetime spans on 5, 10, or even 15 years, it needs to be a bit more, you need to be a bit more careful with what animations you choose, because what is trendy today might not be trendy next year, and certainly not in 5 years. So choosing a careful approach here it can be really important. Of course, the responsiveness is quite important as well. We want things to be responsive, again, because this is what we're used to. We need to make sure that when I click that button, the button tells me that it has been clicked. So you constantly need some feedback loop to actually tell the user that you have registered his actions. But let's get started with the first one. And this is, of course, the context. And I'll just jump into the slide here. Of course, the first question you need to be asking yourselves as you start to develop a GUI or embedded product in general is, who are your users and what are their needs? This is very, very basic stuff for most designers, but it can be really daunting if maybe you are a developer who just got assigned to doing the UX or the UI for the new product, and maybe you don't really have the setup in your organization to actually get out, talk to users, and really identify the needs. Because of course there's beautiful videos on YouTube talking a lot about how you should do this, but very, very often the reality hits you, and you have a budget, and it can be really hard to do this the right way, at least the way it is pictured in all these ideal videos that we see around the web. So one thing you need to keep in mind as well is that the consideration about who your users are and what their needs are is not only a job for the user experience designer. Usually the user experience designer is someone who gathers the information about users, about the domain, but he needs to deliver this to the rest of the development team as well, and need to keep everyone aligned so everyone knows who they're building this product for. Because when you get everyone on board and get everyone on the right track, that means that every discussion and every decision that you make during development and during the process, everyone can help each other with actually delivering some value for the end user, because it can be really hard to settle a discussion if it comes down to if one person likes blue and the other one likes red. If you have a user that says that blue is definitely the thing to go for, that's probably what you should listen to. Of course, we need a bit of let's say a bit of argument of why do we need to talk to these customers and why do we need to talk to these users. And I just want quickly to iterate on this. So in 2005, a consulting firm called Bain & Company, a business consulting firm, they did a survey with 362 companies where they asked all the companies, firstly, are you customer focused? And out of all these companies, 95% said that they were definitely customer focused. Of course, they would say that because everyone is dependent on their customers. They are the main source of income. So it will be quite odd to say that you weren't. Then they asked the companies if they would say that they deliver a superior experience, and 80% of the companies say that they definitely deliver a superior experience to their customers. Søren started off the webinar with a small poll asking you how you think that how many of the customers would actually agree that the companies deliver this, and actually see how this gap turns out. And I actually saw that no one got it right, surprisingly. 8% of customers actually agree that companies deliver a superior experience. So we have a major gap here where companies think that they're delivering the very utmost experience to their customers, but it's rarely that the customers actually agree. And this is quite a problem because we really want to close this gap. We want the companies to actually be able to deliver this experience, this superior experience, and we want the customers to agree, because this is what will make the customers return and actually keep your business running. So I think Søren has a question for me right here.
Yes. Why do you think there's a big gap here? What is the main reason you think?
I think I'll just unmute myself. I think the main reason here is actually that most companies fail to align with the expectations and the needs of their users. This is something that we see a lot today. A lot of decisions and discussions, new products are launched not because they are based on some very grounded user research on how to support the user needs the best. It can be skewed for a lot of different reasons, but I really think it comes down to, are you talking enough to your customers, and are you really listening to what they're saying? All right, I'll go on. So the next question we can ask here is, of course, how do we actually close this gap? How do we make our company deliver on the superior experience, and how do we make our customers agree? One approach to this is, of course, look at the 8%. Look at the 8% there of companies who actually deliver this superior experience. One thing Bain and company found was that these companies have in common that they have a full commitment to treating their profitable customers in the right way, so they will return and even recommend the services of the company to others. And this is actually a very, very central point, and this is something that we today see, that the user-centered approach is something a lot of people talk about. It is the standard way when you want to deliver cutting-edge digital products, because you need to align on a world that is constantly moving and constantly asking for something different. You really need to make sure you have a finger on the pulse, because in the end, the user is who decides the worth of your product. If the user thinks that they have more value in another product or buy a competitor's product, they will not buy yours. So aligning with the customers who are actually paying for your products is the utmost important thing when you're actually starting to develop a new product. All right, we'll move on. So to get a bit more concrete about how you can actually can apply this kind of thinking into your process, is first of all, define your users. Who will be using this product? Is it aimed for children? Is it aimed for elderly people? Is it aimed for people with low or high level of technical knowledge? Because this is all something that you need to think about when you convey the user interface to the user. How much do you need to hold people's hand? Is it someone who has a large amount of experience with touch interfaces, who just wants to go on and solve his task? Or is it someone who are quite new to this technology and maybe needs some more guidance as you go as the user goes through? Another thing that you really need to have an eye on is this product movable, or is it fixed on a wall? Because movable products can usually be placed a bit closer to your face and to your eyes than things on the wall. It really depends on the height, of course, but yeah, funny thing, people are different heights. So something that is movable usually have let's say usually have the same distance to people's eyes than things that are fixed on the wall. So this is something you need to be aware of when you're choosing button sizes and text sizes, for example. Another thing, of course, is, are you working with a product in an industrial setting, or is it something for private use? Because in industrial settings, if it's a product that a user wants to solve a task multiple times a day, and maybe for an extended period of time, he really wants something that is fast and efficient and really supports the task that he has at hand. While on the other hand, if you're designing for private use, usually we go for a bit more flair, and we want people to really have a great experience with this. So this is where we go a bit more into detail and really create a nice vibe to the product. Because when you put something into your home or into your product, you start to identify a little bit with the product. So it's important that it's something that looks good and feels good. Of course, we have the size and the text of buttons, and this is something I think a great example is the car displays today. Some of you might have even tried these, because the size of text and buttons on car displays today is most of the time absolutely horrendous. It's it's really hard to take a quick glance at text on these displays. When you're driving the car, you can't really look at the display for 5 seconds at a time because you need to watch the road as well. So the size of text and the ability to actually hit these buttons when you're driving down a bumpy road, as you usually do, it can actually help quite a bit to keep these in mind when you're designing the user interface. One thing I wanted to include, hope you see my little display over here with the washer, is that this demo that we did is of course aimed for being on a washing machine. So in this case, we were actually having a display that were mounted on a fixed surface. So we should actually be able to read this as a larger distance that we would if people could have it at face level. So the difference here is, of course, is this something that is 30 centimeters from your face? Is it something I can hold in my hand, or is it 1 meter away when the washing machine is at the height of my hip? So the decision we did here regarding text and icon sizes were actually decided on the distance that the most users would have to the display. Of course, I can start it for a bit for a bit flair, keep you entertained at home. All right, Søren, you have.
Yes, we have a question from one in the audience. How much does the geographical culture of users around the world impact the GUI design?
It can actually mean quite a lot. Usually what we want to define when we get a customer in our house is actually, are we aiming for a Western audience? Are we aiming for Europeans or an American market? Or are we looking for an Asian market, or maybe even a third one? Because especially the Western market and the Asian market, it really has different approaches to what a good UI is. So it actually matters quite a lot who you're designing it for, and it really underlines the importance of asking who are the main, who are the users and who are the target audience for this product. All right, so I'll move on and actually sum these context tips up a bit for you before we go into the next one. So of course, keep the focus on your end users, and you should actually do this throughout your development. It's not something you can just do in the start and then think that the world will stand still while you develop your product. You still need to talk to your users as you go through, and it can actually be a very good idea to talk to your users and test the ideas that you have as you go on. Test maybe some quick prototypes and receive some feedback, because this can actually help you stay on the right track as you develop it, because a lot of ideas will come up and be either integrated or bounce off your product or your project as you develop it. So you really need to make sure that the right things get into your product and the wrong things are kept out. And again, the users will decide what these right and wrong things will be. And just to give a quick example as well, usually what we do is kick off a project with user research and maybe a workshop to actually gain some domain knowledge before we actually start to do wireframes and before we start to do the graphic design for the UI, because this can actually help us guide this process a lot and make sure that we are aligning with the customer, again, because we want to build the right thing from the start. All right, so the next point up is performance and hardware. And of course, this is something that matters quite a lot, especially on in these low-cost microprocessors. So one thing you need to keep in mind when you're developing your UI is actually considering these performance options early. And this is not because you cannot do beautiful stuff and do high-end graphics on low-end hardware, but it's because you need to know what the limits are in your hardware so you can actually play to the strengths and not the weaknesses of the hardware. Of course, a framework like TouchGFX is actually amazing in this regard, because it actually delivers some flexible solutions to how you can approach different problems. So sometimes if you have a very low cost processor that can't really do the animations that you want, you might consider doing stuff like animated images instead, and actually hand animate each image. And this is actually something that we did for the washer prototype. So if I start to do a wash, you'll see that the center circle will expand a little bit. And this is something that is actually quite hard to do with most low-cost hardware, the scaling of different objects, because you need to calculate the size as it grows, and this can be quite straining on hardware, and your frame rate will really take a hit. But if you do this in images instead, and actually hand draw the development of this animation, you can use the animated image widget in TouchGFX, which is very, very cost efficient on your hardware. You're just making the software do the work instead. And this is actually something that is quite nice with TouchGFX. Another thing you need to consider on your hardware is, of course, what are the color possibilities on the display. Are you working with the 4-bit displays with 16 colors? Are you working with 24-bit with 16 million colors? Because this is something that really has a lot to say when you're developing the UI. Of course, this is not to say that you can't make great UI on the lower bit displays. In the corner of this slide, you, for example, see our Somfy design. It has a few years on the back, but I think it still looks quite good, and the black and white can really make a UI design quite simple. So less is or more is not necessarily better when it comes to colors. Another thing we get asked about once in a while is viewing angles. I won't be covering this today because we have a tight schedule, but we have a webinar later in the fall. It's called Choosing the Right Display. So if you think this is something that applies to you, you might consider signing up for this. All right, I think we're ready to move on to the tips for performance. Of course, you want to avoid these disappointments that can be in really developing a great looking UI on your $4,000 iMac monitor, and then when you flash it on your display, you realize that you only have 16 colors and everything doesn't look quite as well as you imagined it. So it's a very good idea to actually check early if your graphical design will actually look as great as you think it will. Another thing you want to do is work closely with the developers, and this is to identify the options you have, not only in the hardware but actually TouchGFX itself, because usually the hardware, of course, poses some limits on what you can do. But the solutions to these limits and the solutions to different problems you have during development often lies in the software that you use. And this is where TouchGFX and the flexibility that comes with TouchGFX is actually something that can help the UX and the UI designer try to accompany this into the design. So you're not giving your developers a hard time later on, but you can actually play to the strengths of the hardware and the software that you're using. Of course, you want to evaluate your performance as you go, and this is to identify when you need to find alternative routes. I mentioned before, TouchGFX is flexible, so there's always a different approach to solving a specific task. If you have an animation that's a bit tricky, it's always a different way to do it. It's just a matter of identifying it. So this is quite nice to identify these as early as possible as well. So one thing that I need to mention as well is, of course, that performance should be tested on the hardware itself and not the PC simulator. And this is where the TouchGFX designer, I think Søren will talk a bit about it later as well. The ability to flash something quickly onto hardware with the TouchGFX designer is something that makes it very, very quick to actually test this performance. Again, to make sure that you're not dreaming up something that can't be realized on the hardware that you have chosen.
Actually, while we are talking about TouchGFX Designer, we have a question from one in the audience, and it's actually for you, Henrik. Are you using the TouchGFX Designer, and how are you using it?
I am using the TouchGFX Designer. I use a bunch of other tools as well, but the TouchGFX Designer really comes into play when I get the UI designer involved. So usually my process will be to sketch up very early drawings and making the skeleton of the application. And as we go in, become more detail oriented, I start to get some graphical assets, some images from my UI designer that I can work with. Then I can very quickly start to put these into the TouchGFX Designer and actually set up the UI as I imagine it will look in the end, and I can quickly flash it to the drive. I can do some quick animations if I want to test something out, quick interactions as well. So this actually helps me try out some very early ideas and actually prototype quite fast. And this is usually how you identify and distinguish good ideas from bad ideas. So this is where TouchGFX Designer really starts to make its worth. All right, we'll jump on to the next one. This is rules and recognizability. I mentioned it as we started off as well. I need to say it again. Smartphones define our rules for touchscreen navigation. This is something that is really hard to get around, because the frame of reference that users have today is the smartphone they have in their pocket. There's no way to get around this. It's something we have to keep in mind when we design embedded GUI. One thing that we need to keep in mind as well is the expectations that comes with this smartphone mania, because smartphones, of course, have some hardware that can do quite a bit more than what we can in microprocessors, where we have something that costs a fraction of what a smartphone does. But this does not really affect the expectations users have, and this can of course sound a bit unfair, but it's not something that should actually limit us too much. So when we're looking at these rules that is defined by smartphones, we need to consider these well-established conventions that we see around the app world right now, and this is something that actually comes from a lot of web design as well. I brought a few examples in the text here. The closing X is usually put in the top right corner of the window, because this is where people will look. This is where they usually look when they need to close a window or need to go back in a menu. So another thing that is important to consider here is the reading direction for at least most languages in the world is from left to right and from top to down. So this is actually the direction that most people will scan the interface as well when they're trying to make sense of it, or they're trying to identify where's the navigation, where's the content, where's the thing that I'm looking for right now. And actually having these structured in a way that the user can quickly identify them is something that will strengthen the ability for the user to navigate the interface. And this leads us to what we call a visual hierarchy. This is something that we see in the example in the bottom here, something that can really help prioritize what's going on the screen for the user. So on the left side, where it says a weak visual hierarchy, we have an example of a web page where there's not really any titles, there's no distinguishing in what is content, what is navigation, and this can on the one hand look very boring, and on the other hand it really makes it hard for the user to quickly distinguish where should he look for the thing he's looking for right now. On the right hand side, we have the strong visual hierarchy where the top bar is quickly marked out, and this might have some navigation, maybe a search field, and then the content comes along as he moves down the UI. So this reading direction point is usually why people put the navigation in the top of the screen or on the left side, because it is where people will look in the first place when they're trying to see how they can navigate this interface. One example that we can do here as well, I'll return to our washing demo over here, is in the visual hierarchy point, because what we imagined when we did this washing machine demo was that for most people using a washing machine, it really comes down to quickly identifying the washing program you're looking for and then starting the wash. It's not a lot of nitty-gritty details that you want to go into. Maybe you do, but not necessarily what you're looking for. So we wanted the main part of the screen to be made of the most important thing in the interface, and this is of course the washing programs. So we have a central part of the screen where we can choose the program that we're looking for, and we can start the wash right away. So in this way, we have already prioritized the content of the UI for the user, and it makes it easy to find exactly what he needs at that time. All right, I'll just sum up the rules and recognizability tips, and I'll get back to you, Søren, so you can ask your question. First of all, get inspired by smartphone UI design. There's a lot of great things out there. There's a lot of things that people have spent hundreds and thousands of hours on designing and thinking out. So it's a great place to get inspired, because this is the reference that people will have when they're using your interface as well. So it's a great place to check out if you're looking for different or alternative solutions to what you're already making. Another thing to keep in mind is check if you're following the rules. If you're breaking any conventions, breaking any rules, you really need to think about why you're doing it and if it is necessary, because each time you break a rule, it will make the user stop and think, what went wrong here, or what do I need to be aware of? If it's not important that the user does this, then it can really start to get frustrating that things are not as the user expects. And then, of course, in the end, take advantage of a strong visual hierarchy and actually guide the user throughout your application. You really want a flow throughout the application and help the user solve the task that he's trying to accomplish. And then I'll get back to you, Søren.
Great, and thank you, Henrik. Before we move on to the next topic, we would like to launch one more poll and hear more about who's making the user experience design at your company. I'll launch it now, and you can try and then put it in who's making the UX at your company. And meanwhile, Henrik, maybe you can share more about how you're working together with the TouchGFX developer, the embedded developer, and you. How do you secure that the relationship is good and you're getting the best product?
Yeah, and actually, I think it's a great question. It's a great question because it's a hard one to answer. It really comes down to what the structure is of your company. I'm quite lucky to have access to my developers pretty much all day, every day. So what I do when I get an idea, and if I want to check if something is something that can be realized on the final hardware, because I'm not an expert on hardware. I know a bit of TouchGFX, but I'm not a developer either way. I don't code. I don't do C++. So I need people around me that are experts on these fields. So what I usually do is actually go down and insanity check my design with a developer before I put in too much time and effort into the direction that I'm heading, because I want to make sure that this product is something that of course can be realized, but I also want the input from the developer, because usually he sees some different opportunities and different ways of doing this, so that can actually help benefit the final user experience, something I can incorporate into my design. So that back and forth with the developer, I think is a very, very healthy relationship, and something that you should strive for, at least as much as your company structure allows it.
Great, and thank you. And we can see here that 75% of you is actually the software developer doing the user experience part of the GUI. And I think it would be worth mentioning here that this is actually the beginning of a webinar series. The topics today is high-level speaking, and we will do more webinars in the future, diving into specific topics. And later on in this webinar, we'll also try and get some input from you about what you think is relevant to learn more about. So we can plan more webinars and equip you more to make a fantastic embedded product. That's but please proceed, Henrik.
Yep. Without further ado, I will. So the next one that comes up is the consistency. This is of course something that overlaps a bit with my previous point about the rules and recognizability, because you want to be consistent with the choices that you have in the UI. So if you're following any rules, if you're following conventions, and I really hope you are at least following some conventions, then you need to be consistent with these choices, because generally speaking, the more the user has to learn about this interface, the less he or the further away he has from actually taking full advantage of the product. If it's hard to reach new features, or maybe it's hard to understand how to really use them, chances are he won't use them at all, and in that way your shiny new feature actually won't have any value for this customer because he's not using it. So in that way, it's really important to be consistent and make the minimize the learning that the user has to do to actually use this product. Because of course something that you often can forget is that the user is not just navigating the UI for fun. It's not the goal for him to just poke around in your UI. It rarely will be, at least. He's actually using your UI to solve a task. Maybe it's operating a washing machine over here. Maybe it's buying a ticket. Maybe it's turning on a light. Maybe it's operating an industrial machine. He's trying to solve a task in the real world, and the user interface is a gateway to actually doing this. So it's very important to make the UI as invisible and as possible in this regard. You don't want the user to think too much and learn too much about how to navigate this. It should come as natural as possible. And this is of course something that can be done by actually using some subconscious tricks, because there's a lot of clues in the visual design that can actually guide the user. One that's brought up very often is the color red. Color red usually means that you're canceling something, you're going back, you're closing something. So by integrating the color red into your design, you can very quickly, and of course integrating it in the right places, you can very quickly guide the user to places where he can see that he's going back. So in that way, you incorporate these very natural subconscious things into the UI that makes it a bit easier for the user to come by. To sum up some of these into some easy to read tips is of course that you need to design for the user's expectations. If the user is always surprised by what is happening in the UI because things are not consistent, he will stop and think each time, and it will actually interrupt the task that he's trying to solve. It'll interrupt the flow he has of buying that ticket, or setting or washing those clothes, or operating that machine. And this actually makes a very bad user experience quite fast. So it's important to keep these expectations in mind when you're designing the flow throughout the application. Another thing, of course, you want to be consistent in is the graphical design. You need to be consistent with the colors, the shapes, the icons, the typography that you use, because this is again something that the user will try to get familiar with. And as soon as you break this balance, the user will stop and think, why did you do that? Is there a reason for this? And should I be aware of something? And if there's not, this will get quite frustrating very, very fast. Another thing you need to be consistent is, of course, the general navigation, the menu structure, the position of buttons should be consistent. Again, so the user can find a natural way around the UI. If he needs to stop and identify, how do I get out of this screen, or how do I continue throughout this screen each single time, it can become a very, very tedious product or a very tedious task to do. Of course, in the end, you need pretty much to make the UI predictable, and we can actually compare this to driving down a road, because driving down a road with a good visibility, no sharp turns, is actually a bit more enjoyable than driving down something that has very narrow roads. You never know what is coming up, because this is really interrupting your flow on the road. You really want to see what is ahead, and the user has the same way here. He wants to see the path to actually solving the task he has at hand. That brings us to the last point for today, or at least for me, and this is a responsiveness and animation in embedded GUI design. One thing I need to mention here can be a bit philosophical, but on the bottom, humans are very communicative creatures. We're always looking for feedback for the actions that we do in the world. One example is that if I'm talking to Søren, I'll become very frustrated quickly if he does not recognize that he's listening to me, if he doesn't keep eye contact, if he's doing something else and not really acknowledging the things that I'm saying to him. I'll be frustrated a lot earlier than I actually think I will. And it's the exact same way with user interfaces. Actually, we expect things to give us some feedback until that the action you just did, it actually mattered, and it actually got registered by me. Because when this fails, and you've probably tried it before, clicking around on your desktop, on your mobile phone, as soon as you don't get feedback, as soon as nothing happens when you tap the screen or touch the mouse, you think that something broke. Maybe the application has frozen, maybe the product is dodgy. So you really need to constantly deliver this feedback, because it's actually very vital to make a UI feel responsive when you're providing this user experience, and actually providing a good one. To do this in a very let's say in a low level way is actually providing press states for all your buttons, maybe all your sliders as well. Make sure that when the user touches a button, he can see a slide movement with the images, that there's another image for the press state, so you can identify that I pressed this button and the interface knows I did. That will make him happy for a while. So that's a good thing to incorporate. Another thing that we're covering in this point is animation. Animation, of course, is something we see all around different mobile apps, and you can't really open one of the big apps today without everything being riddled with animation, small fades, small bubbles coming up and dimming the screen, fading out again. Everything is moving all the time, and it can be very tempted to incorporate this into your embedded GUI design right away as well. As I mentioned earlier, one thing that we need to consider when doing embedded products that have quite a long lifetime is that animation on smartphones can get updated pretty much every week, every month. You'll see this change in the apps that you use today. What we see today is not the same what we'll see in 1 year, but on embedded in embedded products, and these can have a lifetime. We usually see 5 to 10 years. I've seen 15 years as well. This is actually a very, very long time, and it makes it quite hard to actually do something that you know will last throughout the ages. One reference I brought for you today is the most sold mobile phone of 2005. So this is 13 years ago. We haven't even reached the 15 years lifetime yet. This is the Nokia 1110. Maybe some of you remember it, maybe some of you owned it, but this is quite far away from the expectations to mobile phones that we have today. And this is just to give you a little visual idea on how long 5, 10, or 15 years can actually be. So what we usually do when we add animations to our embedded UIs is actually considering, is this just a trendy animation? Is this something that has been around for a while, or is it just the newest, craziest animation that we need to incorporate just because, or is it because we actually are trying to incorporate some life into the application, and actually having small subtle animations that won't really take too much attention from the user, but it's all these small micro interactions, all these small micro animations that can really gather up and deliver a great user experience. So one advice I would have for you is really look out for these long animations that we see once in a while, animations that last half and whole seconds. Those can really add up and start to get annoying, especially in 5 years' time, when we have a completely different expectation to waiting times. So it's really important to not keep the user waiting for too long when you add animations. Make them be snappy and make them be a bit subtle, so the user won't grow frustrated with them. And just to sum up this point, is provide the feedback for your users. Use press state on buttons, messages if something changed that the user needs to be aware of, and constantly make sure that the user understands that the UI is talking back to the user. Making sure that everything is okay and his actions are actually being registered right now. You of course need to avoid this user frustration, and this is by actually just letting the user know that the UI interactions have an effect. Last but not least, animations are quite important, especially today when the expectations from mobile phones is that animations are everywhere. But really consider that you're not only incorporating trends because they are trendy right now, but try to think of the whole product lifetime and incorporate something that won't be completely annoying in a year or two, or something that won't really last the whole lifetime without becoming at least looking very, very obsolete. I think that was it from me, at least for now. Of course, if you have more questions, please throw them in, and we'll have a QA in a few minutes. Søren told me he just wanted to say a few words, so I'll just give the word to you, Søren.
Thank you, Henrik. Please change the slide. Oh, you have. Thank you. While talking about the TouchGFX Designer, we'll just launch a poll quickly, and just to see if you are using market or user research to secure your product success. Please put in your vote, and let's see what the outcome will be. And after this, we will talk a bit about the TouchGFX Designer, how we are using it, and how also Henrik is using this, especially in user tests, and how fast and easily it can be done. I can see we already at 70-80% vote ratio, so let's close it, and I'll share the result with you. I can see a lot of you are not doing user and market research, so maybe this could be a topic that we should discover later on. If it should be, please let us know, and we'll do a poll later on also to get your inputs on what could be relevant. Yes, back to the designer. Just to give you a quick idea about the designer, the TouchGFX designer, with this you can easily and fast create a simple UI. And you can simply choose a board, a pre-supported board by TouchGFX, and build a UI. It doesn't have to be the most fancy one with the greatest graphics, but you can, in a few minutes, already get started. And maybe, Henrik, you can explain more about how you're using the designer to do user tests and iteration also.
Yes, I think I mentioned a bit earlier when in the process that I actually start to use the TouchGFX designer, and this is usually when the UI designer starts delivering some assets to me, some images that has this feel of a final application. What TouchGFX designer really allows me to do is quickly flash it onto some hardware, not necessarily the end hardware that I'll use for the product, but just the same size of screen is often enough. And when I have this on my hardware, it's pretty much only the fantasy that sets the limits for what we can do. You can go out and talk to users and actually ask them about how they experience this. If some of you read our case on a customer Nico that we engaged during Embedded World this year. Nico invited us, or we invited Nico to partner up in a workshop during Embedded World in 3 days and actually build a prototype. One of the things that we talked about, Nico, is that we wanted on something on day 2. So when we were halfway through the process, we wanted something that we could put onto some hardware and actually go out and ask people, how do you experience this, and how can we make it even better? And this was something that the TouchGFX designer actually allowed us to do, was very quickly build up a rough interface on the UI, flash it on some hardware, go out and test it, just immediately come back, do the changes, and then you could go out again and ask some more. And the amount of iterations can actually deliver quite a lot of feedback and really give you a good feel of what direction you should take your product.
Great, and thank you, Henrik. Could you go to the next slide, please? To give you something from this webinar which you can use, Henrik and Kim has made a PDF file with sharing some of the UI and UX wisdom, and please check this out. We've made a handout which you can see beneath the question pane, and you can download this. And if you can't see it or didn't receive it, please let me know. We will also share this after the webinar. Great. Please, the next slide, Henrik. The TouchGFX designer is also available online in a free evaluation version. Please visit touchgfx.com. You can also see the link in the chat for this download. Getting more support, knowledge base, and so on, you can visit our help center. We have basic knowledge base articles, videos, examples, and so on. You can, of course, write us, both me and Henrik, and we will try and help you move on. And also, upcoming and previous webinars can also be found on our website. As I mentioned, we will do more of these webinars later on, but we will also do more on the embedded side, the developer side, on hardware integration, for example, and this will be done next week. So please sign up if this is relevant for you. We will also do another poll here just to see what you think could be a relevant topic to discover in this line of webinar regarding the UI and UX. So I'll just launch a poll here, and please give your input here. If this doesn't cover what you think could be relevant, please use the chat or the questions just to give us a quick answer on what you think is relevant. This is good input for us and useful for future roadmap planning for webinars. So please let us know. So we, and they are coming, I can see. We have a lot of from idea to finished product and responsiveness and animations. I'll just close it now, and you can also see the results, of course. Yeah, this is also the results most likely from our earlier webinar today. So we will take this into consideration, and yeah, please stay tuned in on our website. Great. Next slide, please, Henrik. We are online after the webinar also. It will end in a few minutes. Try to answer all your remaining questions, either in voice or in writing, and you can also write us an email if you have any questions. Next. Yeah, and thank you for attending this webinar and being active. More is to come in the future, and we hope to contribute to in your making of a successful product. And we will wish you a great day or evening, depending on where you are, and hope to see you again next time. Yeah, maybe you have a last thing to say, Henrik.
Yeah, I do. Thank you so much for tuning in, guys. I hope you got something for it. If you have a question or anything that any interest point that you thought we should talk a bit more about, just quickly leave a comment or a question below, and we'll talk a bit more online with you before we all head off. But have a great evening, guys.
Yeah, and you can see an email address here, TouchGFX info@dropnographics.com. Please write us and let us know what you think, and if you have any questions, feel free to fire away. Yeah, bye bye from here.